Hey, hope you're having a great day. This video is going to talk about why your parents and whoever you're revering doesn't always give the best advice. When you're in school, when you're trying to get into a good college, oftentimes you revere certain people and assume that they always have perfect advice. But as I've learned over time, that's often flawed, and I want to kind of dive deep into this so that a lot of the young students watching or aspiring young professionals can have a better grasp of reality and try and take in other forms of advice to really kind of propel themselves to success more. Now, for me, when I was growing up, I definitely revered my parents, and that was partially because of their success story. They came to America with very little money, and through their brain power, through their hard work ethic, they were able to find good jobs. We're not talking like millionaire level, but good solid jobs, and then rise in that organization and really get to a middle class level. They started out at a very low income level, and they were able to rise over time, over the decades, to middle class and then upper middle class. And because of that, I very much respected them. In my earlier years, I saw them really cutting back. Even small things like getting a $20 tin of Yu-Gi-Oh cards for Christmas was something that they would debate when I was younger. And I saw them just keep working hard, keep putting in the hours, and rise to a level where they were really doing well. My mother, I'm very proud to say, was one of the highest scoring people in terms of mathematics and other problem solving in her province. And provinces are much larger than US states, so that's saying something. Now, of course, what that ultimately ended up happening, and this is very common with young people, is you just assume or you revere your parents to be like all-knowing or people who always have the perfect advice. And sure, when you get to your teenage years, you start to doubt a lot of that, but at least for me, underneath the kind of skepticism and fights I would have with them about certain advice, there's still a certain level of respect and reverence, because I just felt like they'd been through everything and they knew what was going on. But here's one great example of where you have to start to question that, obviously in a respectful way. It's not about being toxic back to your parents or disrespecting them or saying your advice sucks, but to just start to take in other advice from other sources to get a more three-dimensional view. And that was with resumes. I remember the first time I really had to start building resumes and stuff like that to apply to my first jobs. And my mom would be like, here's how you do it. And she was super exhaustive, needlessly so. And I didn't realize it at that time. So I was very skeptical, but she felt like she had this great idea of how to write a good resume and cover letter, and ultimately that resulted in a resume that was like 5-6 pages long with every extraneous detail about me, and also a cover letter that she thought was very well written. But since English wasn't her first language, I saw it as a lot of sentences were kind of clunky and unnatural, but she felt it was really well done, and she thought like maybe it could be tweaked a bit, but it was generally pretty good. And also, she tended to take control. So rather than having me write it myself, she would give me that chance once or twice and then just say, this is crap, I'm going to write the whole thing for you. And of course, it ended up being this weird, clunky thing. And later on, I discovered I was not the only student to do this. And a lot of these, college applications, people and hiring managers would get these cover letters that were clearly written by their parents and would just come off very strange or not ideal. And for me, not being a great writer myself, I knew enough to know that the writing was unnatural, but had a hard time fixing it myself. So I just felt very frustrated, and it was not a good scene. So over time, as I kind of just let that era of my life pass, and it was at the time I felt it was like life or death, but at the end of the day I still ended up getting some jobs, and some of them were actually pretty good. They weren't great, but I got some good jobs. I remember working as a soccer referee, and the pay was pretty good. I mean, I would get $15-20 per game, and some games would only last 40 minutes. So despite like all the frustration in my head. Like it wasn't the end of the world, even though I saw my cover letter as crappy. So don't freak out either. But as I learned, I realized, my parents were not perfect beings, and a lot of their advice was not always good or ideal. So over the years following, I started to learn a lot from career professionals, career gurus, people who had really helped a lot of people or themselves succeeded in the career world. Getting into top tech companies, getting into organizations that are very hard to get into. And one of these people I studied was Ramit Sethi, and he's very big. He has this high trafficked personal finance blog, and he's helped thousands of people get into like top tech companies that are very competitive, or whatever company you can imagine. And he has a whole system and process and mindset. And through that, I learned, wow, some things my parents said were not actually even good ways of doing that. And for example, one of those things was the resume. He says your resume has to be short, 1 pages, 2 pages tops, because the fact of the matter is hiring managers will give your resume 5 seconds max, sometimes 2 or 3. And that's because they're skimming and they have hundreds of resumes to get through because everyone's applying to these jobs. And so when you add more, it becomes worse because you're padding with all this excessive stuff that they don't care about. Like, you were a member of the Pet Humane Society and 12 other clubs in high school. And what they really care about are just a few select bullet points. Can you get the job done? Do you know about this skill set? Have you ever used Photoshop, for example? And that's what they really care about. So when you hide those important bullets in 3-4 pages of crap, it gets missed. And so it's a philosophy of less is more, where you just highlight the most important bullets that they care about, and that does a lot better job, especially when you're young in the workforce and you don't have 20-30 years of experience to put on that resume. And so that's just one example, but I started to learn, some things that my parents said are not right. And I also started to learn that it's not just parents, but other people, other organizations that I revere, sometimes they're not as flawless or as perfect as I thought. There's definitely companies I worked for where just because it was my first company, I thought, wow, this is really cool. The culture, the vibe, everyone's so super supportive and great. And because of that, I got this reverence, and I just felt like, wow, they must have the perfect management style. They know all the answers. They're wise. They're understanding. This is the best place to work. And while some of that may be true, maybe it's above average, over time I realized, wow, they still have a lot of learning to do in certain ways. The communication, the structure, the processes, they're kind of far from perfect. And so for me, at least in my personality type, I had to really, over many years, start to kind of dismantle that, because it's not always the most productive approach. When you kind of just assume this person is perfect and you take their advice at face value, you might get somewhat far, but you might fall short because it's a flawed perspective or flawed viewpoint just based on their experiences. And the fact of the matter is, my parents, although they did pretty well in terms of most standards, they're still not like killing it in the sense of like getting into all these super competitive tech companies or being able to get into those Ivy League schools. They never accomplish or experience a lot of that. So there's a whole cohort of people who are much better than them still that you could learn something from. So that took me a while to kind of build off of. And it's a natural tendency to kind of just lean on who's close to you, who you have direct communication with. And so this may be relatable to you, but it might just be easier to kind of talk to that bigger brother or sister, or talk to the parents, or talk to your friends and get their viewpoint. And of course you can still do that, but if you're only doing that because you're scared, or it's too much discomfort or research to go on Google or the internet or find other YouTube channels or websites, like Ramit Sethi's website, IWillTeachYouToBeRich.com, and really learn from them, then you get this situation where ultimately it's kind of less than ideal. So that's it. I don't want to just keep rambling and saying the same thing, but try it out. Get those other sources. I think the best thing to do is to just find people who are accessible, who have accomplished things that you want to. And that means not necessarily going to these YouTube celebrities or people who are bombarded all the time with DMs, but going to maybe your local network, your school network, and finding people who have gotten into that, Netflix or that Google or that Apple, whatever company that you're interested in. And maybe it's not a big tech company. Maybe it's just a highly selective, competitive, small boutique agency or design firm of some sort, whatever it is. And then learn from them, because they may tell you things that your parents have no idea about, such as, hey, it's also just as important who you know rather than what you know. So make sure to network. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching.